Welcome to the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. We provide fiction reviews for the lit, curious reader, because why not try a little of everything? Our scholarish approach and cozy book club atmosphere makes literature accessible to everyone. Whether you're a casual reader or a devoted bookworm, join us on our literary journey to explore all genres. Hello, and welcome back to the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. I'm Joey, and today Jennifer and I will be having an affair with William Faulkner and his short story, A Rose for Emily. So before we begin, I'm sure most people have heard of William Faulkner, but have probably never read him because he is notorious for being extremely difficult, which is why I'm glad that we read this story, because it's not. But let me give you a little background of who William Faulkner was. He was a Nobel Prize-winning American author, best known for his novels set in the fictional county, inspired by the American South. Born in 1897 in Mississippi, Faulkner drew from his family's history, particularly his great-grandfather, a Civil War colonel, to craft stories exploring themes of race, morality, and the Southern aristocracy. Though he initially wrote poetry, he gained fame with novels like The Sound and the Fury in 1929, As I Lay Dying in 1930, and Absalom, Absalom in 1936. His controversial novel Sanctuary, published in 1931, became a commercial success, and his 1949 Nobel Prize cemented his literary legacy. Faulkner also worked as a Hollywood screenwriter, but considered it purely financial work. Faulkner's personal life was marked by intense relationships and tragedy. He married his childhood sweetheart, Estelle Oldham, after her divorce. After their daughter died shortly after birth, his writing often reflected Southern racial tensions and complex family dynamics influenced by figures like his Black caretaker, Caroline Barr. Despite dropping out of high school, Faulkner's intellectual curiosity led him to experiment with modernist techniques, earning him 2 Pulitzer Prizes and 2 National Book Awards. His works remain celebrated for their deep psychological insight and unflinching portrayal of the South's contradictions. He died in 1962, leaving behind a profound influence on Southern literature.
I am so glad that you brought us some background information on him. I find, yet again, it's so fascinating how these writers' personal lives have such a profound impact on what they write. You and I, in another book club, had read and discussed The Sound and the Fury. And yeah, I can attest, it was a challenge. And I'm very glad that the story that we're doing today seems much more straightforward in its language, but the subject matter is challenging, Joey. But thank you for putting us back in that time. We've been floating around with a lot of authors writing things in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. So I think it's been very interesting to see how they are similar and how they are different.
Mm-hmm. Because he writes Southern Gothic literature, and that's what he's pretty well known for. And so does Flannery O'Connor. And which, of course, we've read both authors. So I just want to give a little bit more context into what Southern Gothic literature is, because I think it's one of those things that gets tossed around a lot, but probably people don't understand, like, well, what does that mean? So it's a subgenre of Gothic fiction that explores the dark, grotesque, and morally complex aspects of the American South. And it's rooted in the region's history of slavery, racial tension, religious fervor, and decaying aristocracy. And it blends macabre humor, flawed characters, and supernatural elements to critique social issues. But unlike traditional Gothic, where you would get like Wuthering Heights and stuff like that, that's set in castles, Southern Gothics unfold in decaying plantations, small towns, or rural landscapes, often featuring deeply flawed or eccentric characters such as outcasts, violent preachers, or tormented aristocrats, who we have today. And then you'll know other authors like Tennessee Williams, who also wrote stuff like that. And as I said, Flannery O'Connor. So they're probably the most 2 well-known people. And Tennessee Williams, he's obviously very famous.
Thank you for telling me and just making that super clear, the difference between Gothic literature, which we know, Wuthering Heights, that type of thing, and Southern Gothic. Because as I was reading the story, I was thinking, isn't it interesting that, at least in my reading experience, we don't have similar storylines that are appearing in the North, out West, on the frontier. I'm just not getting exposed to those stories. But this dark, decaying, social, mental illness sort of soup has been very interesting that both Flannery O'Connor and William Faulkner really focus on. So I just thought that was super interesting. I'm like, oh, I don't think there's higher prevalence of that type of thing happening. I just happen to believe that those writers in that time were hyper focused on showing that to the world. And I just found that super interesting.
Well, I think that's a good point that we don't really get like Northern or Western Gothic in the US, but I don't know that there is such a thing. I've never heard of it if there is, but I think it has to do with Reconstruction after the Civil War and after all the things that happened before that and after, because there was this aristocracy, this elite class that was sort of like the aristocracy of England. And so we have these uber rich people that own a lot of land and a lot of the money and they're hoarding it. And so I think it parallels what was happening in England and the UK. That's my opinion.
I totally believe that, Joey. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay, so to start us off, let me give us the summary of this story. When Miss Emily Grierson dies, the townspeople attend her funeral, curious about her reclusive life in her decaying mansion. A once respected figure, Emily had been lingering relic of the Old South, clinging to her family's former prestige. Years earlier, she refused to pay taxes, insisting on an outdated arrangement made with Colonel Sartoris, despite his death. Later, a foul smell from her home prompted townsmen to secretly sprinkle lime, avoiding confrontation. After her father's death, Emily briefly dated Homer Barron, a northern laborer, shocking the town. When he disappeared, rumors swirled, but Emily withdrew entirely. Decades later, after her death, the townspeople broke into a sealed room upstairs, discovering Homer's decomposed corpse in a bridal suite, along with a strand of Emily's gray hair on the pillow. The grim revelation unveils her tragic descent into madness and isolation. Okay, Jennifer, why don't you start by giving us your initial impressions?
Joey, I really did enjoy this story. Again, it's an author that when you start reading, you just get the sense that I'm like, oh, this is a William Faulkner story. And his language choices in this story are not incomprehensible, but he just has some really beautiful images that he brings up. And I really appreciated that. The good news, Joey, I didn't read anything about the story before I read it. So everything that
Yeah.
happened was a surprise. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, we're using the word rose a lot, which is interesting to mean like to rise up, problems rose, like all of these things, and like the physical rose. Okay, another author, interesting word choices. What are you doing here? And then this, for me, the surprise ending. Really? Of course. Of course, that's how the story ends. And
Mhm.
I knew there was trouble, Joey. I knew there was trouble when she gets a boyfriend and he mysteriously disappears. I'm like, oh yeah, he's buried out back. This is how we handle strife.
He was
You
not
just
buried out back.
and he was not. So that was a moment for me to go like, oh, how interesting. Oh, the neighbors are complaining that there's some ill smells emanating from my house, but it's too rude. Back to the Flannery O'Connor rules of what you are supposed to do and not do in Southern culture. You can't tell a lady her essence and her house doesn't smell
Mhm.
great. So they break in. Spoiler alert, I love this so much. Like, we're just going to break in and sprinkle some lime around your house just cuz.
Yeah,
Public
the
service. That's what
yeah,
we
we're
do.
we're not gonna ask you if we can.
No
Yeah.
questions. Anyway, we'll get into all those details. The minute little details that talks about her interaction with the pharmacist, the line of questioning, the things that are expressed directly and things that are under the surface that people are like, it's not polite to ask, but we kind of think maybe there's something else going on here. I just
Mhm.
really loved. And that felt true to my experience of reading two of Faulkner's works from 1929 and 1930 that really feel like him. Like, I think we talk about some authors just have a blueprint that they follow, and it's very clear that they stick with that. I'm so interested in reading some of his later works because I have not done that yet to see if that has solidified into just I've got one note and I just keep playing it, or if it expanded into something different as he aged and his life conditions changed. So first
Okay.
impressions, read the story. You're going to love it, but it's also another creepy, weird, didn't see that coming moment.
I'll give my initial impressions. I love this story, and I did not see it coming. I had read it like a while ago, and then when I reread it to see like, oh, do we want to discuss this for our podcast? I forgot about the ending, and I was like, oh my god, that's so messed up. That's so disgusting. Okay, so I really love that. It's funny that you said that it feels like a Faulkner story because to me it doesn't really because of how he wrote it because this is very clear cut. You could follow along. You don't have to try and decode what he's trying to say. You can get from A to B and understand and you don't have to dig any deeper. You can just enjoy the story and get grossed out at the end. But what I really loved about this story is the narration. In Ursula K. Le Guin's book on writing called Steering the Craft, she defines this style of narration as the observer narrator using the third person. Now, I don't know if that's how everyone would define it, but that's the language that she uses for that. So she says this is when the narrator is one of the characters, but not the principal character. They're present, but not a major actor in the events. And it's a story the narrator witnesses and wants to tell us. So I think we can see that in, is it Elizabeth Gaskell? What's that one? The snowy one? And the guy that is on a carriage and then he gets into an accident. You've read it.
Ethan Frome.
Ethan Frome. That's it. Is that Elizabeth Gaskell?
No,
That's Edith Wharton.
thank you so much. It
Okay.
is Enid Worthington. I'm like, we can play the guess who it's not, but I'm not sure I can get it. But
It's
you
not.
always get stuck on Ethan Frome, and you're like, the guy with the sled. I'm like,
I
yeah,
forgot
that
his
guy.
name, and okay, it's Edith Wharton. Okay, pretty close. All right. So I think that's another style of story. And Wuthering Heights, we just said that. It's told by the caretaker's perspective. But I do want to read the opening first sentences of The Sound and the Fury. So because I think this sounds completely different than the Faulkner that I know from As I Lay Dying and The Sound and the Fury. So let's see if we hold them up next to each other, if other people see the difference. Through the fence between the curling flower spaces, I could see them hitting. They were coming towards where the flag was, and I went along the fence. They took the flag out and they were hitting. Then they put the flag back and they went to the table, and he hit and the other hit. Then they went on, and I went along the fence. Luster came away from the flower tree and we went along the fence, and they stopped and we stopped, and I looked through the fence while Luster was hunting in the grass. Now, to me, these sound like two different people. And in this scene, in case anybody was not aware, this is Benji's perspective, who's one of the characters, and he's watching golf being played behind a fence.
We don't know that for a
Yeah,
very,
you
very
don't know
long
that.
time. We don't figure that
No.
out. So, Joey, I'd like to, if I could be so
Yeah.
bold, is to amend my statement because I still believe, and what you just read, that mini snippet, and you're like,
Hmm.
yeah, that is Faulkner, and it's very hard to figure out who's speaking, what are they doing. It's totally messed up. Why are you looking behind a fence? What are flags? What are hitting?
Hmm.
None of that made sense. Like until way into the novel. Not something I loved, by the way. Like not knowing what's going on is not my favorite. What about this story arose from Emily made me feel was a Faulkner thing was the way in which, and I'm just going to read the first sentence of this as the compare and contrast, and then tell
Yeah.
you why for me this cements us into Faulkner. When Miss Emily Grierson died, our whole town went to her funeral. The men threw a sort of respectful affection for a fallen monument, the women mostly out of curiosity, to see the inside of her house, which no one, save an old manservant, a combined gardener and cook, had seen in the last 10 years. He uses words like even the August names of that neighborhood, an eyesore among eyesores,
Mhm.
Cedar bemused. He talks about the Union. He talks about the Confederacy. It just feels like the types of things he draws attention to in his other stories. So
Yeah.
that was the resonance that was coming for me, that it wasn't the
Hmm.
style, it was he's the person who's going to, and he was talking about the social hierarchy and he was talking about social norms in this old town where they're using horse and buggies and horse-drawn carriages and that kind of thing. And it just cemented me in that part of the place. That's
Hmm.
my rationale, Joey.
Yeah, his language is still very Southern Gothic in A Rose for Emily. That's undeniable. Yeah, I think he is showing that he can write in different ways. And speaking of trying to track his progress as an author, this is sort of a tangent. It's not really. It's another modernist. It's Virginia Woolf. I had just read Jacob's Room. It's one of her earlier works. So you can see in that one where she's going to get eventually with Into the Lighthouse and Mrs. Dalloway. And it's really fascinating to be like, oh, like it's not fully developed here yet. But I see it coming through, but you just like haven't figured out like that is your authorial voice yet. So it's really interesting. And I wonder if we do that with Faulkner, if we can see like, oh, I see what you're ramping up. You're teaching yourself, you're honing your craft here. It would be interesting. Okay. I think we're all done with the beginning. Oh my God. Ramping up. Okay. What would you like to talk about? Okay. Would you like to start? Because now I'm all over the place.
Yeah, Joey, because I want to keep going with my theme of
Yes.
why this feels like Faulkner to me. And again, this is a fairly short story. I'm going to say it was 10 pages or so, something along those lines.
Yeah, mine
It
was
was
7.
broken down into really nice, easy to understand sections. The only head scratcher was like, wait, what? Were you really sleeping next to a dead body all these years?
Mhm.
And nobody asked where that dude went? And I have to remind myself, Joey often say this is he wrote it in 1929. It feels like it was something he was looking in the past, right? He was looking in the distant past
Mhm.
that they didn't have phones. He makes a point of saying when they received free mail delivery service out in the country, he
Yeah, yeah.
refused to do that. So I think in the 1880s, I just read this recently, in the 1880s or 1890s, that was when the big push for rural delivery services in the countryside, both in the South and in rural places like
Mhm.
Michigan, where I grew up, that became a thing. And so there may not have been a reliable way for his people to check on him. Like, oh, I thought you went north. Oh, they thought you went south. And actually, your girlfriend murdered you. Hmm. Okay. That's a thing. And so I just really appreciated that he is drawing attention to the tragedies that befell her individually. Like her father was not a great guy. He dies. He was kind of keeping her from living her life. And then when he dies, she gets this one chance with this northern guy that they all say, oh, no respectable southern woman would be interested in someone from the north. She's like, well, he's a guy, he's new in town, he doesn't know my past, like, we'll give it a go. And the consequences of unrequited love compounded with her mental illness. So I'm not sure chicken and the egg here for me, but
Mhm.
clearly things were not right. She did not leave her house. It feels like she had some limitations around that. And it was a touching story that still feels like it could have happened minus the horse and buggy and the lie, as in the chemical that dissolves stinking bodies of
Mhm.
decomposition. It could have happened 5 years ago, right? This is a story of derangement and longing. And yeah, I just was really moved by it, but also like, ew, gross.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that this story in particular, I do want to mention that his name is Homer Barron. That's the love interest's name. This is not a romance. Weird way to explain that, but that's who it is. And I do want to mention that he is black. He's black and he's a northerner. And that
Wait,
feels,
I totally missed that he was black. How did I miss that?
oh, yeah, he's black.
Wow. Okay. Whole new dimension to why all those snooty ladies were not having it.
I think that's why it's an important thing because you're talking about like the Reconstruction era of the South after the Civil War. And I just happened to be reading W.E.B. Du Bois' book, Black Reconstruction, and it takes place, I think, from 1860 to 1880 is when he was tracing it. So I'm learning a lot, which is unfortunate because like I should have learned that already probably in school, but whatever, it's too late. I could teach myself now. But what I was talking about in the introduction about Southern Gothic and with Faulkner that he was highlighting contradictions within the South during this time. And so I'm assuming this is probably a little bit maybe like after the Reconstruction era, which I believe probably ended by this point in the story. I think the earliest date is like 1895 that he mentioned. But there's still, we have Emily who is like holding on to the only life she ever knew, which is the old South way of living. She lives in this plantation style house that's crumbling apart. And if anybody has read The Fall of the House of Usher, where the house and the Usher family cannot be separated and it crumbles, that reminded me of that, which is also a Gothic because that's at Grandpa. So it was just interesting that she falls in love with this northerner, Homer, and it's something that should not have ever been an option for her in her mind. He's black and he's from the north and he's a day laborer. She's from a class of the landed gentry kind of type. She would never have been expected to work as a woman. Of course, she works later because she's out of money and she needs a job. But it really highlighted the contradiction within this one person that's trying so desperately to cling on to the old tradition of the South and not move forward with modernity.
Joey, thank you so much for taking us there because I'm now rereading the first couple of paragraphs and
Mhm.
he talks about exactly what you said, these beautiful old structures that now have crumbled, these houses that are in decay. There was not money to replace them or to keep them up. So they're just slowly kind of melting down into themselves with rot. And he talks about garages and cotton gins had encroached
Mm-hmm.
on the town. And I just want to read this section because they talk about only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores. And now Miss Emily had gone to join the representatives of those august names where they lay in the cedar bemused cemetery among the ranked and anonymous graves of Union and Confederate soldiers who fell at the Battle of Jefferson. Alive, Miss Emily had been a tradition, a duty, and a care, a sort of hereditary obligation upon the town dating from that day in 1894 when Colonel Sitaris, the mayor, who fathered the edict that no Negro woman should appear in the streets without an apron, remitted her taxes. The reason I take us there, Joey, is that reminding us that this was set after Reconstruction, the failed reunification of the United States. That's where Jim Crow started, right? We had a
Mm-hmm.
great idea, didn't quite go so great in the South. That with that lens, he is just throwing all the things out about cotton gins and garages and decay and saying the senselessness of the Union and the Confederacy soldiers being buried in the same graveyard. All of that was such a pinpoint of this moment in time that I think those of us who are so far removed and are not like Civil War or Reconstruction buffs might miss all of the layers of that. Reconstruction, Jim Crow, all of this Southern nonsense about racism feels like, as he said, a sort of hereditary obligation upon the town. Then it's just tradition. Not a great tradition, but it's a tradition. And I just really
Mm-hmm.
appreciate you taking us back there.
And after, when she eventually dies, men show up dressed in Confederate soldier clothing, whatever the hell they call them. Sol
Let's call those
army garb.
uniforms.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Or that,
I'm
Joey.
having a hard
They
time
were
today.
not
I don't know
actually
why.
doing cosplay. They were actually
No.
wearing their
Yeah.
actual clothing from the war.
Yeah.
And it was interesting, Joey. I'm glad you took us there because Faulkner says that those older gentlemen who obviously were not contemporaries so much of her, they confused time. They're like, "Oh, I knew her when she was a girl. We used to
Mhm.
court, we used to dance together." Like, and they're like, "What?" Like Faulkner's like, "No, you didn't." I think you're getting confused on the time frame here, but it was also that interesting idea of the elusiveness and the flexibility of time. Was it a decade ago? Was it 30 years ago? We don't know in our own lives. I think as we get older, like, was that in 1980? Did that happen in 2012? I don't know. It's the same to me at this point. And it's like, well, the 80s and 2012 are very different. But as I get older, I realize that my grasp on key time points, it kind of melds. So I had a little empathy for those old Southern Confederate soldiers who are like, yeah, I knew her when we were kids. We hung out. Like, no, you didn't.
No, no, don't put yourself in that. Sorry. I actually love that part when he talks about memory in that way because it made me think like, oh wow, that's a really fun way. Maybe not fun is the best word. It's a really interesting way to think about memory and how other people interact with their own memory. So I'll just read that a little bit, and I'm gonna read it, not the whole thing. The very old men summon their brushed Confederate uniforms. There you go. There's the word on the porch and the lawn, talking of Miss Emily as if she had been a contemporary of theirs, believing that they had danced with her and courted her perhaps, confusing time with its mathematical progression as the old do, to whom all the past is not a diminishing road, but instead a huge meadow which no winter ever quite touches, divided from them by the narrow bottleneck of the most recent decade of years. Now that's poetry, bro. Okay? That's poetic. I just love that idea that it's not this linear thing or time or the way that we're perceiving time, which is like mathematical progression. You would assume it goes in one direction, but he's saying it's like a huge meadow that no winter ever will ever touch. I perceived that as this perfect space that people can return to and see the perfect memory, even though it's embellished in this case. It's like little flowers. They plant little flowers of memory and they go and they pluck them and maybe I guess that grows back. Otherwise you just take one memory forever. But you get it.
Joey, it would not be a conversation about memory and the flexibility of time if you don't mention your boy who does a lot of things with
Hmm.
time not making any sense.
I was gonna mention Borges.
I knew it was coming in there. It's
But
the poetry.
I
So
didn't
it's like,
want
I
to.
think I'm picking up on our theme. And Joey, since we are having a little bit of playfulness with language and the fact that you and I seem to be struggling for words a bit, I would love to take us to the scene where Emily also is struggling for some words. And I just want to read the scene because I was like, isn't this interesting? She says, I want some poison, she said to the druggist. She was over 30 then, still a slight woman, though thinner than usual, with cold, haughty black eyes and a face the flesh of which was strained across the temples and about the eye sockets as you imagine a lighthouse keeper's face ought to look. I want some poison, she said. Yes, Miss Emily, what kind? For rats and such, I want the best you have. I don't care what kind. The druggist named several. They'll kill anything up to an elephant. But what you want is arsenic, Miss Emily said. Is that a good one? Is arsenic? Yes, ma'am. But what you want, I want arsenic. The druggist looked down at her. She looked back at him, erect, her face like a strained flag. Why, of course, the druggist said, if that's what you want. But the law requires you to tell what you are going to use it for. Miss Emily just stared at him, her head tilted back in order to look him eye for eye until he looked away and went and got the arsenic and wrapped it up. The Negro delivery boy brought her the package. The druggist didn't come back. When she opened the package at home, there was written on the box, under the skull and crossbones, for rats. And I just
Mhm.
loved everything about that scene because people thought in the next scene, it's like, oh, she's going to use the arsenic to kill herself. Nobody stops her. They're like, she's over 30. She's jilted lover. It's probably for the best. Like, just
Yeah, that
check it
was
out.
messed up.
Just check it out. And we realize it's not for me, this playfulness of Faulkner sets her up for this romance. And I know you said this is not a romance. It's like, well, she was courted. They did go riding through the countryside. They were establishing some sort of intimacy and connection. She thought she was going to marry him. She brought the marriage clothes. She got the brush and the comb and the razor and all the stuff that you would give to your husband at that era. And they say he's in bed with his shoes off and his tie off, like he'd been in bed. So maybe they consummated their non marriage. No judgment here.
Hmm.
And when he was like, oh, by the way, I'm not the marrying kind, which is actually words that he says because he prefers men. That's what I read, Joey. So you can help me sort that out.
That is exactly where I was gonna go
I
with
was
this.
like, the what? I was very confused. But the fact that on the box it's for rats, right? And I think if you were in the 50s and somebody does something wrong, you would call them, oh, you dirty rat, right? Like, so in the idea that rightly or wrongly, she believed that this person was going to be her intended. She intended to marry this man, and it didn't work out. So in some ways, he was the rat who needed to be exterminated
Hmm.
because this just isn't going to work out. And so I just thought that was an interesting angle where people were like, oh, well, if she's going to use the arsenic to kill herself, that's okay. Nobody's going to say anything about it. And I was like, how strange.
Yeah, I 100% Homer's gay. 100%. There's no, I don't think that there's any other, I don't know how anyone else would interpret it. That, okay, I'll read it. I'll just read it.
Please
So,
do because it is so specific. And I was like,
yeah,
oh, I had a
it's,
debate with somebody about the term confirmed bachelor as coded language for something else. So
which means you're
please
gay.
read this.
Not that anyone would say that now, but okay. Faulkner writes, so the next day we all said she will kill herself, and we said it would be the best thing. When she had first begun to be seen with Homer Barron, we had said she will marry him. Then we said she will persuade him yet, because Homer himself had remarked he liked men, and it was known that he drank with the younger men in the Elks Club, that he was not a marrying man. I think that's pretty direct, that Faulkner is telling us Homer is 100% gay. He enjoys the company of men and he's not marrying a woman. So, what my idea is here, and this I feel like this supports it, okay? Because I think this was a lavender marriage, which if you don't know, do you know what that is?
I only know what it is because you explained it to me, Joey. So please explain for the rest of our
Okay.
listening audience what that actually means.
So basically, it's like a beard. When you get a beard, when a gay man gets a beard, which is not a physical thing on your body. I mean, like when you marry a straight woman to make it look like you're straight. So a lavender marriage is like it's mutually beneficial because you're both able to go out and have sex with other people.
Could
We don't
you
want to have
be
sex
your
with each
true
other.
self? And you can be your true self in a society that will not allow you to be yourself. So you have to have this pretend marriage that
Yeah.
mimics the other societal norms at that time.
Yes. So that's what I was thinking this was. It's the lavender marriage. I
I
think
don't think
it's
she was down with that. I'm like,
yeah,
I'm
I don't
not
think she would have figured
buying
that
that.
out.
I'm like, I
Yeah.
think lavender marriage needs to be a two-way street. I think he was definitely a one-way street here.
I really appreciated that Faulkner put that in there because it's not an issue in this story that this is a gay man. And I will die on this hill. Homer is gay. I do not care what anyone says. I will take no critiques on this. He just throws that in there. It's not up for debate. It doesn't come up again. It's not like, oh, he's a homosexual. This is a problem. So I really like that it was immediately normalized. It was just a characteristic of Homer and it was never going to be an issue for anyone in the story. So, bravo, Faulkner, you're ahead of your time, sir. To add to what you're saying is we don't know what is going through Emily's mind at any point or Homer's. And that's what I really love about this story is that it's very enigmatic and ambiguous. And he obviously purposefully did this because of the narration style, where we're getting it from an outside perspective when he could have written this from Emily's perspective and it would have been a great story. I would have loved to read an entire novel just like this, not like The Sound and the Fury, although I do love The Sound and the Fury. I would love to have read a whole novel about Emily and her romance to whatever capacity with Homer. I think it is so much more effective that he shrouds everything in mystery because we don't know what did she use that rat poison for? Did she keep it this whole time and kill Homer with? Did he die of natural causes? Did she kill him in another way or did she have her servant help or something? I will say that there is a parallel between The Smallest Woman in the World by Clarice Lispector because characters use dead bodies in very strange ways.
Joey, I'm glad that you took us to that parallel because writers have a choice of putting any characteristics in any circumstances they want, right? That's the joy of writing. You create the world that you want us to see. And I think in both of those stories, written by women about longing, about loss, about wanting to love and not having the capacity to do that because their circumstances did not allow it. So I think there is a perfect parallel there of, hey, if you can't love a living person in the way that you want to, you are going to, did they say sublimate? That love is going to seep out of you in some other channel. And so I think that was really a great thing for you to bring up. I want to go back because I'm now a little bit more intrigued about what Faulkner put in there at the time. Okay, I will say I grew up in the 80s. I didn't really know that gay people existed. Like that wasn't a thing. And it was kind of something that someone could do, but it certainly wasn't anybody we would know. And there's like four people in the whole world who are gay in my little tiny world view. Obviously, there have been homosexual and lesbian relationships since the dawn of time. So, my question to myself and to you is when he wrote this in 1929, looking at something that happened in the 1890s to the turn of the century there,
Mhm.
if someone said in casual conversation, "Hey, I just don't get women. I just don't get women. I think I just really like hanging out with guys at the pool hall and drinking. I don't think I'll ever marry." Was that a signal or was that just like, "Oh, women may be difficult to deal with and I would just prefer not to be entangled into a relationship, so I will stay away." So I was very struck, were the words he said because Homer himself had remarked he liked men, and it was known that he drank with the younger men in the Elks Club. I just took that as I'm not interested in marriage. I want a freewheeling life. I want to be free to come and go as I please. I just do not want to be tied down.
Mhm.
And that was just interesting for me that if Faulkner was, as you said, just putting it out there, it's kind of no big deal. this is a fact about him and it's really no big deal and nobody brings it up. And the next paragraph, after they're seen out and about, says, then some of the ladies began to say it was a disgrace to the town and a bad example to the young people. The men did not want to interfere, but at last the ladies forced the Baptist minister, Miss Emily's people were Episcopalians, to call upon her. He would never divulge what happened during that interview, but he refused to go back again. The next Sunday, they again drove about the streets, and the following day, the minister's wife wrote to Miss Emily's relations in Alabama. Then they all come down and try to interfere, and then she's like, hey, guess what? I'm getting married. You all need to go. And to support your idea of this was a marriage of convenience for people who were perhaps not romantically suited to one another, is that she
Mhm.
got her goal. She got her family off her back. Those meddling little cousins went back to Alabama where they came from. And then he came back into town 3 days after they left. So I'm like, isn't that interesting? And so,
Mhm.
Joey, I just thought it was interesting that they were like, oh, we don't approve. You're setting a bad example. And if it is, as you said, and I still don't know how I missed that detail, so I apologize for that. This was a mixed race couple in a place
Mhm.
that was not going to be accepted at that time. That I could see that was a hubbub. Twice in this story, at least twice, Faulkner says Miss Emily has a conversation with a man of authority and they don't come back. She, whatever she said, whatever her either mental illness or her directness or her worldview, whatever it was, they're like, we are not going back there. Isn't that curious?
Yeah, I think Faulkner puts in some very choice language to help us understand Emily from this outside perspective because when the tax people come to collect the taxes, he says, so she vanquished them, horse and foot, just as she had vanquished their fathers 30 years before about the smell. We have this like formidable woman that it feels like it's no surprise to me that she can repel anybody that wants to come in and try and tell her what to do. She will vanquish them every time. There's a lot of ways that Faulkner describes her. That's one way that I really liked. He describes her as, thus she passed from generation to generation, dear, inescapable, impervious, tranquil, and perverse. I was like, damn, those are good descriptions of people. That's not a normal way that somebody would be like, oh, they're nice. They're cute. He's like, she's inescapable, impervious, tranquil, and perverse. And I was like, that's insane.
So, Joey, something just popped out at me again. I love it when you plant a little seed in my head about things that I'm like, that didn't happen. It's like, well, kind of happened if you read it in this lens. So, when we next saw Miss Emily, she had grown fat, and this is after the boyfriend disappears, the
Mhm.
meddling cousins go home, all of that happens. When we next saw Miss Emily, she had grown fat and her hair was turning gray. During the next few years, it grew grayer and grayer until it attained an even pepper and salt iron gray when it ceased turning. Up to the day of her death at 74, it was still that vigorous iron gray, like the hair of an active man. Now, that's an interesting way to
Yeah.
describe a hair color because my father was an active man and had a beautiful head of gray hair. And that's coming for me. But I would probably be deeply offended if someone said, wow, your hair looks just like an active man, because I'm a heterosexual woman and I don't want to be identified with characteristics of a man. So, again, is this possibly Faulkner just telling us some things without telling us some things? Just
I
an
sort
interesting choice of words.
I took that as sort of like the double standards with men and women because on a man, this would mean you're active. You got gray hair, that's active. But on a woman, it's like, oh my God, you look
We're
like you're about to
decrepit.
die.
You're decrepit. You should just
Yeah,
just
it's
cash
just,
in your chips. You're done.
yeah. And the way that he describes her physically, I do want to read that too because I think it's important because he mentions how fat she is. Normally, I'd be like, "Oh my god, okay, we get it. She has a fat body. That's great." Like, I don't care that much. But I think in this case, I thought it meant something else that he was trying to explain. Now, let me find that exact quote.
Joey, I completely agree with you because and I know you're going to take us right to that quote.
Mhm.
He talks about the structure of her body
Yeah.
being kind of frail. Her skeleton is a dainty, petite woman, but she gains all of this extra weight, and it's like, is that the weight of grief? Is that the weight of guilt? Is that what is that? It was
Yeah,
interesting, but he's very specific in his language.
yeah, I'll read that because that's exactly what I was about to read. So, her skeleton was small and spare. Perhaps that was why what would have been merely plumpness in another was obesity in her. She looked bloated, like a body long submerged in motionless water, and of that pallid hue, her eyes lost in the fatty ridges of her face looked like two small pieces of coal pressed into a lump of dough as they moved from one face to another while the visitors stated their errand. So I had the same idea. Like, I don't think this is just about her being like a physically larger person. If someone thinks that this is fat phobia, that's valid. Okay. It's a little harped on a little too much. I agree with you that I think it means something else. I didn't think it was what you were just describing, but very similar, that I felt like she's carrying the weight of the old South and she's like trying to hoard all of this tradition and memory in her that it engorged her body. Now, am I reading too deeply? Maybe, but I don't care.
No, Joey, I love that because what I was going to say is like, oh, well, maybe she has a medical condition because
Yeah.
Faulkner often throws in random medical conditions for
Uh,
his characters and describes their symptoms. And you kind of have to play medical detective to figure out what is going on. Maybe
mhm.
she had edema where you just have this excessive fluid in your body. And maybe that's
Oh.
why she just kind of got, they say you get really kind of uncomfortably swollen. Maybe that's part of it. But I love the idea of the physical manifestation of the social pressure and the discontent and the failing structures just all manifested in her body and turned her grotesque. As you said in our opening, thank you so much for taking us to what is the definition of Southern Gothic. Part of it is this very descriptive, grotesque, both body and talking about rots and the smells and just kind of a lot of very visceral stuff that's not lovely. Right? We even talk about like, oh, a rose for Emily. I thought, oh, there's going to be like a rose bush and we're going to do something awesome and it's going to be all these flowers at her
If
funeral.
Virginia
And I was
Woolf
like,
wrote it, yeah.
nope, it's all gross. And that is not, there's nothing beautiful in any part of that. Like physical beauty is absent. And that was very striking. His language was so rich with meaning, and that was beautiful. But I can't recall anything, any physical scene of a person, a place, the furniture. None of that had beauty in it. None.
Yeah, I think it all showed the beauty it once had. Now, I'm not saying because this was a larger woman that she couldn't be beautiful. I don't know what she really looks like. There's no picture that went along with this. She very well could be, but obviously his description is purposely, you don't compare someone to a lump of dough. And that's not, obviously, that's not like a nice way to go about it, but it is grotesque too. That's the grotesque part, saying that she looked pallid, like she was a body long submerged in motionless water. Like these are grotesque descriptions of a body. And especially when he's describing the inside of the house, even before we find out Homer has died, he says it smells of dust and disuse, a close, dank smell. And of course, this is where we continue to get the gothic themes here and the atmospheres because everything is dark and heavy and covered in dust and hasn't been used in a long time, and the house is falling apart. So, bravo.
Indeed, Joey. And can we just take just a second again to just double down on the vividness of his language around things that are super gross and disgusting from my sensibility? So it said, the man himself lay in bed. For a long time, while we just stood there, looking down at the profound and fleshless grin. The body had apparently once lain in the attitude of an embrace, but now the long sleep that outlasts love, that conquers even the grimace of love, had cuckolded him. What was left of him, rotted beneath what was left of the nightshirt, had become inextricable from the bed in which he lay, and upon him and upon the pillow beside him lay that even coating of the patient and biting dust. So, just everything about that is so richly described in its hopelessness and despair. And there's just dust everywhere. And it's been locked into that tomb for a really long time, just waiting
Mhm.
for someone to bust it open and reveal the truth. And again, this feels like a larger story about what was going on in the South at that time? Do we need to bust open these closed off places and expose the horror that was there and move on?
He just does such an amazing job of creating these scenes with like so few words. This is not a long story. That's like the thing you just read is like, I don't know, three or four sentences or something, if that. It's not even a full paragraph, and you get everything that you ever needed to know about that scene. But I want to finish reading that last bit because it's the very end of the story. Then we noticed that in the second pillow was the indentation of a head. One of us lifted something from it, and leaning forward, that faint and invisible dust, dry and acrid in the nostrils, we saw a long strand of iron gray hair. And so we immediately go like, I remember who has iron gray hair. So again, this is just like masterful literary work here where he set us up to be like, you're gonna remember that I I said that. You're gonna know it was her. But we don't really have any confirmation. And we don't know this is the really ambiguous part I felt like about this ending is because first of all, we don't know how he died, obviously. We don't know how long he was there for. We can guess it's a long time if he's a skeleton because that probably took some time. But we don't know how often she went into that room. If it's covered in dust and everything seems like the dust has settled, it hasn't been disturbed in a while. That could mean that she laid next to him right after he died while he was dying. Or it could have meant that she was in the room and sleeping in the same room. That's what I wanted from the story was that was where she slept every night was next to this rotting corpse. That's messed up, but
Or maybe
I
just on their anniversary. It's just
yeah,
like
like
a little sleepover on our
or on his
anniversary.
birthday or something. Yeah, a special
Because
occasion.
Joey, because I appreciate that they tell us when her hair changed color, right? So, like
Mhm.
on my pillow, because I dye my hair, it's nice and brown. But if you found a long silver hair of mine and you know when my hair turned silver, that is a really clear marker because I think they said that that door had been sealed for 40 years. And I don't know why I think that, but I have a really strong recollection, which is probably my imagination, that they did some kind of timestamp with
It
that.
says, "Already we knew that there was one room in the region above stairs which no one had seen in 40 years, and which would have to be forced." But yeah, I mean,
But it
I
doesn't mean
don't
it had to be closed. I get
yeah.
you because it's like she could still be going in and out of there.
Yeah, just no one had been in the house is what I got from it. We don't know the ending is I mean, it's not ambiguous. We know they're both dead, which was what's that story? Oh no, that's
Happy
Margaret
endings.
Atwood.
Yes, Joey, you are right there. Yes, Mary and John do end up dead in the end.
Yes.
Pick
I
your own
mean,
adventure. Yes, I
Margaret
get it.
Atwood was correct. All stories end in death eventually. I really loved that it's up to our imagination to be like, oh, did she stay in there all the time? Was it on special occasions like their anniversary? Was it just once and like she left a hair there? I mean, we have no idea, and Faulkner will never tell us because he's dead.
And
I
he left us there, Joey. That's the part
yeah,
I love. It was just mic drop, done. I'm like, that's what? What did you try to tell me in this story? He's like, figure it out yourself. I told you everything I was going to
yeah.
tell you about this story.
Yeah, I like stories like that where they're really ambiguous. And this is pretty ambiguous, I think, the whole time. We don't know why her first love ran away. We don't know why her father, they said that they imagine the image of her and her father with her father standing in the foreground and her in the background and him holding a whip to, I guess, be like, don't come near my daughter. Like, why? And he never wanted her to get married even though he knew he wasn't going to live forever and he didn't have any money because I'm assuming he lost all of it with the Civil War.
And Joey, thank you for taking us to the dad with the image of the whip because
Mhm.
when we see her and Homer Brown in the buggy, they say that he also has a whip in his hand and a cigar. So I'm like,
Mm,
huh,
it's true.
those are very interesting parallels. I'll just say thank you for taking us there. What's
Yeah.
that about?
Yeah, that's why I really wish this was a full novel and that we got all of the information because I really am interested in these people's lives. Like, I want to know about Homer's life. Like, how did he get here? Why did I think they're rebuilding the sidewalks in the town so that we can see this is actual reconstruction now. There's starting to be infrastructure brought in. There's the postal service that's coming in, sidewalks. Those are nice, modern conveniences.
Progress is coming to town, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. And I will say, as my ending note there, is that if you like this story and you want to read a novel that is very similar in tone and theme, I would suggest The Elementals by Michael McDowell, who was the screenwriter for Beetlejuice. So if you like Beetlejuice, you'll probably like his writing. He wrote a bunch of books.
Hey, Joey, that
And
is
he
in
was
fact.
gay. I had to mention that. That was a homosexual. Please read it.
Thank you so much, Joey, for enlightening us to that parallel. Because when we started our conversation, and we will wrap this up here, Faulkner, like others that we have talked about, mostly women, he took a job writing these screenplays to pay the bills. So his
Mm-hmm.
true love was, I believe, novel writing, poetry, the things he did before, but he did transition into writing screenplays because he had to pay the bills. Like Shirley Jackson needed to do something different. She had to mass produce all of her works because they needed the money. So I really appreciate that you ended us with the recommendation for the book. Say it to me again.
The Elementals.
The Elementals, that was written by a screenwriter turned
Yeah.
writer, or vice versa. So, what a
Actually, I don't
beautiful
know how that
bookend.
worked, but
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Joey.
next week we're going to be reading The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu.
Sounds great. Looking forward to that, Joey. I'll see you then.
See ya. Thank you for listening to the Extra Literary Affairs podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. And don't worry, it'll be our little secret you stepped out of your literary comfort zone. Check out our link tree to follow us on TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky, and Storygraph.